Hello everyone. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. That's how YouTube keeps sending you stories like this. And now, let's get into it. When I moved to Denver in the summer of 2014, I was broke and desperate. I had just finished college, didn't know anyone in the city, and the rent prices were way out of my range. For weeks I bounced between Craigslist ads, most of which were scams or shared rooms that felt like traps. Then I saw one that seemed normal. A small, two-bedroom place near City Park, $550 a month, utilities included. The guy's name was Eli. He said he was quiet, worked odd hours, and wanted someone low maintenance. That sounded perfect for me. The neighborhood looked decent when I went to check it out. The house was an older brick duplex on a calm street lined with elm trees, about a 10-minute walk from the park. Inside it was clean but strangely bare. No decorations, no personal touches, just the essentials. The living room had a worn couch, an old flat-screen TV, and a single framed picture of what looked like a mountain range. The kitchen was spotless, almost too spotless. I remember thinking maybe he had just cleaned up for me. Eli himself was a wiry guy in his mid-30s, with thinning brown hair and pale skin. He had an odd way of standing, too straight, almost rigid. He was polite, spoke quietly, and didn't make much eye contact. He told me he worked with tools, but didn't really explain what that meant. He said his last roommate had moved to Oregon. He barely smiled but seemed fine enough. Rent was cheap and I didn't have other options. I moved in that weekend. The first night he made pasta for dinner. He said he liked to cook sometimes. We sat at the small kitchen table while he talked about random things. How he hated social media. How people these days don't really know what pain is. He said it like it was a fact, not an opinion. I laughed awkwardly, thinking it was just a weird comment, maybe something philosophical. He didn't laugh back. His face stayed blank. After dinner, he cleaned everything meticulously, even scrubbed the stove with a toothbrush. Then he disappeared into his room and shut the door. Over the next few days, I barely saw him. He worked late or left early. When he was home, his door was always locked. I noticed he had 4 separate locks on it. 2 deadbolts, a chain, and a latch. The frame was reinforced with metal brackets. It looked like something you'd see in a panic room. The first time I noticed it, I told myself maybe he had expensive stuff in there, maybe tools or electronics. But the way he kept it sealed, the way he never opened it unless I was clearly out of sight, made something in my stomach twist. My room was small but fine. A bed, a small desk, one window that looked into the backyard. Most nights the house was dead quiet, except for the occasional creak of the old floorboards or the hum of the fridge. Around the 3rd week, I started hearing strange noises from his room late at night. One time, around 2 a.m., I woke up to this faint electric whine, like a small drill or a power tool. It went on for about 30 seconds, stopped. Then there was a thud. Not loud, but heavy, like something hitting the floor. After that came something else, a sound I'll never forget. A muffled voice. A woman's voice. Just a few words, maybe even just a single word, but I couldn't make it out. Then nothing. Total silence. I froze in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was the TV or a dream or maybe the house settling. But I didn't have the courage to get up or knock on his door. I told myself I'd imagined it. I even convinced myself that maybe he was just watching something on his laptop. Still, the sound stuck in my head. The next morning when I saw him in the kitchen making coffee, he looked perfectly normal. Calm, clean, even cheerful. He asked if I wanted some coffee and I said no. I remember watching his hands shake slightly when he poured the cup. A few days later, he asked me if I could help him move some old junk to his car. It was a Saturday morning, and he said he wanted to clear out his room a bit. There were 3 cardboard boxes stacked near his door, sealed with multiple layers of duct tape. When I picked one up, it was heavier than I expected, almost unnaturally so. I asked what was in it, and he said just old tools, but as soon as I lifted it, this smell hit me. a sharp, metallic chemical smell. It reminded me of bleach and something else, something coppery, like blood. I almost gagged. My stomach turned hard. He didn't seem to notice. He just carried the other box out to his car, calm and quiet. We loaded them into the trunk of his old Honda Civic. The car was spotless inside, but the trunk was lined with thick black plastic taped along the edges. It looked too deliberate. I felt this deep, tight panic rise in my chest. When we were done, he thanked me, said he'd be gone for a few hours, and drove off. I went inside and just stood in the kitchen staring at the floor, trying to breathe normally. I kept thinking about that smell. That night I couldn't sleep. The next morning his car was gone. His room door was wide open for the first time since I'd moved in. The room was almost empty. Bed stripped bare, no clothes, no boxes, nothing personal at all. Only one thing stood out, the floor. There was a small patch of carpet near the corner that looked slightly darker, maybe wet. I didn't touch it. I packed my things that afternoon and left. I didn't even stay the night. I moved into a studio apartment a week later, a cramped place downtown that cost way more than I could afford. But I didn't care. I couldn't shake the unease. Every time I walked past City Park or saw a gray Honda, I felt that same cold pull in my chest. I told myself to forget it, that maybe he was weird but harmless. I didn't really believe that, though. About a month later, I was eating breakfast when the news came on. A story about a woman's remains found near Cherry Creek Trail. They said she had been dismembered, her body wrapped in trash bags and dumped under a bridge. I sat frozen at my table, my spoon halfway to my mouth. The newscaster said police had no suspects, no witnesses, no leads. They showed a picture of the area, a quiet stretch of trail not far from where I'd jogged a few times that summer. I could barely breathe. I thought about calling the police, telling them about Eli, about the boxes, about the smell. But I didn't know his full name. I didn't have any proof. The lease wasn't even in my name. He'd sublet it unofficially. The landlord didn't even know I'd lived there. All I had was a first name, a car, and a sick feeling that wouldn't go away. I told myself maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe the boxes were full of scrap metal or old equipment. Maybe I was connecting dots that didn't exist. But some nights, when I think about it, I remember his face, the way he stared straight ahead while talking about pain that first night. The way his hands shook while pouring coffee. The way his room smelled faintly like bleach. I kept checking the news for months, hoping to see his name, hoping they'd found him. But nothing ever came up. No arrest, no mention of an Eli, no follow-up on the case. Eventually, the story disappeared. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. The faint sound of a drill, the thud, the muffled voice. I tell myself I imagined it, but every time I close my eyes, I can see those sealed boxes, feel their weight in my hands, smell that mix of chemicals and copper that no normal tools would ever have. I still wonder where he went, what was really inside that room, and if the woman they found near the creek was the same one whose voice I heard behind his locked door. I'll never really know. But sometimes when I walk through the city on cold nights and hear the hum of distant machinery, it feels like I can still hear that sound. Faint, electric, buried somewhere in the dark, just beyond the walls. It was late, around 11 p.m., and the laundromat on 38th Street was almost empty. I remember the hum of the machines more than anything else, that deep, steady sound that fills up quiet spaces. The place smelled faintly of detergent and burnt lint. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered just slightly every few seconds, enough to make the air feel uneasy. I had 2 loads going, one in the washer, one already in the dryer. It was a cold night, early spring, maybe March. I'd come there because the machines at my apartment complex were broken again, and this was the only 24-hour laundromat I knew of. I figured I'd be in and out in under an hour. When I walked in, there had been one other person already there, a man sitting in one of the plastic chairs across from the dryers. He wore a navy blue hoodie pulled up over his head, gray jeans, and worn black sneakers. I noticed right away that he didn't have a basket No detergent, no laundry bag. He was just sitting there, completely still, staring at the dryers turning. At first, I didn't think much of it. People do weird things late at night. Maybe he was waiting for someone, maybe he worked there, maybe he just needed a place to sit. But after a few minutes, I realized he hadn't moved once. He didn't have that restless posture most people have when they're waiting. He wasn't scrolling through a phone or reading anything. Just sitting there, staring at the spinning silver drums like he was hypnotized. I kept my head down and focused on folding the clothes that were done. The dryers rattled. The hum of the washers filled the room. And every so often I could hear the buzz of the vending machine compressor kicking in. The man hadn't moved an inch. When my last dryer buzzed, I bent down to pull my clothes out. I could see his reflection in the metal door. He had stood up. I felt my stomach tighten. I didn't look directly at him, but I could sense him walking closer. I could hear the slow drag of his sneakers on the tiled floor. He stopped beside me. I remember his voice clearly. Low, quiet, almost calm. He said, "You fold those nice. You've done this before." I just nodded, forcing a small smile, and turned away. I didn't say anything. I put the rest of my clothes into the basket, zipped my jacket, and started walking toward the door. My heart was pounding harder than it should have been for something that small. I could feel him watching me as I left. When I stepped outside, the air felt sharp and cold. The parking lot was almost empty except for my car and a rusted pickup at the far end. The streetlight above my car flickered weakly, making the shadows pulse across the pavement. I walked fast. My shoes echoed on the concrete. Behind me, I heard the door to the laundromat open and close. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I could hear his footsteps. Slow at first, then a bit faster, matching my pace. I could see his reflection in the glass windows of the dark storefronts I passed. The navy hoodie, the pale skin under the streetlight, the way he walked with his hands shoved deep in his pockets. When I reached the corner, I cut sharply toward my car. I saw his reflection in the car window just before I unlocked it. He was smiling, lips pressed together so tightly that it almost looked painful, like he was holding something in. I got in fast, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I pulled away, I saw him in the rearview mirror. He was standing under the flickering light, not moving, just watching my car until I turned out of sight. The drive home took about 10 minutes. It felt longer. Every time I slowed at a red light, I looked around to make sure no one was following me. The streets were mostly empty. A few cars passed, but none looked like his pickup. Tried to tell myself I was overreacting, that he was just some weird guy who hung around the laundromat. Still, my hands were shaking the whole way home. When I turned into my driveway, the headlight swept across my front yard, and for a split second before the beam moved off, I swear I saw him standing there. Same navy hoodie, same still posture, hands in his pockets facing the house. The light passed and he was gone. I froze. I didn't even get out of the car at first. I sat there with the engine running, staring at the spot. My yard was small, maybe 20 feet deep with a short wooden fence separating it from the neighbor's place. There wasn't anywhere he could have gone that fast. Still, he wasn't there. I finally forced myself to get out. I grabbed my laundry basket, hurried to the front door, unlocked it, and got inside. I locked both the knob and the deadbolt, then turned on every light in the house. I checked the windows, the back door, the garage. Everything was locked, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was outside. I called the police around 11:40. I told them about the man at the laundromat, about him following me, about seeing him near my yard. They said they'd send someone to take a look. When the officer arrived, he was polite but looked tired, like this wasn't the first strange call of the night. He walked around the yard with a flashlight while I stood on the porch. He found footprints, several of them in the soft dirt near the back door. Clear impressions of sneakers. The pattern was the same as the ones the man had been wearing. There was something else too. A single dryer sheet pinned under the edge of the back door, like someone had tried to push it underneath. The officer asked if I knew anyone who would do that, if maybe it was a prank. I told him no. I didn't know anyone like that. He told me to keep the doors locked and call if I saw anything else. Then he left. That night I barely slept. Every creak, every small sound made me sit up. Around 2 a.m. I thought I heard something outside, like gravel crunching. But when I looked, there was nothing. I finally fell asleep sometime after 3. The next morning I went outside to take a look in daylight. The footprints were still there, clearer now. They led from the side gate toward the back door, then away again, disappearing at the corner of the fence. Whoever it was had come close, maybe even stood at the door for a while. I didn't go back to that laundromat again. A few days later, I drove by just to see it during the day. It looked smaller than I remembered. The row of dryers by the window was the same, but there was no sign of him. I told one of the employees what had happened, just to warn them. The guy behind the counter said there had been a few complaints lately. People saying they saw someone hanging around late at night, just sitting inside without washing anything. He said one woman had come in early one morning and found a hoodie folded neatly on a chair. No one ever came to claim it. After that, I started using a different laundromat across town. For a while I was fine, but a couple of weeks later, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. When I went to do laundry one night, I opened my trunk to grab my basket and found a single dryer sheet sitting on top of my clothes. It wasn't mine. I hadn't used any that day. It was the same kind, same brand, same smell. Fresh linen. I threw it away, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. About the way he had smiled, tight-lipped, like he was holding something back. About the footprints behind my house. About the dryer sheet under the door. I never saw him again. But sometimes when I walk through parking lots at night, I still glance at the reflections in the windows, just to make sure no one's smiling back. I just finished college and was desperate for work. The kind of desperation that makes you apply to things you barely understand, just because the listing doesn't say unpaid internship. I was living in a cramped apartment in Portland, sharing it with 2 other people I barely knew. My degree in communications didn't mean much in that market. Every morning I'd wake up and scroll through job boards while drinking instant coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. That's when I saw the ad. It said, "Marketing startup hiring entry-level associates. Growth opportunities. Downtown Portland. Interviews this week." No company name, no website, no social media presence, just an email address ending in a random string of numbers. I didn't even think about it twice. I just sent my resume and a short note saying I was available immediately. I got a reply that night, a short message that said, "Come tomorrow, 11 a.m., 12th floor, 415 Morrison Street. Ask for Mr. Redmond." The next morning I took the bus downtown. It was raining, like it always does there. A thin, steady drizzle that makes everything feel colder than it really is. Morrison Street was half empty, quiet, with old office buildings that looked like they hadn't been fully occupied in years. Number 415 was one of those places. Gray stone, high windows, and a lobby that smelled faintly of mold. There was no receptionist, no security desk, just an elevator with one flickering light above it. I pressed the button for the 12th floor. The elevator creaked its way up, stopping for no one. When the doors opened, I expected to see a hallway full of offices, but there was only one door at the end of the corridor. A piece of yellow sticky note was taped to it. In black Sharpie, someone had written MKT. That was it. I hesitated, wondering if I had the wrong place. But I was already there, already soaked from the rain. I knocked once, then pushed the door open. The office was empty except for a single desk in the middle of the room, and a man sitting behind it. He looked to be in his late 40s, well-dressed, with slick dark hair and a neat tie. There were no computers, no phones, no papers. Just him, the desk, a chair on my side, and a large window behind him showing a gray view of the city. The air smelled faintly like disinfectant. He looked up when I came in and smiled. It was a long smile, one that lingered even after it should have faded. He didn't stand, didn't offer a handshake, just motioned for me to sit. I took the chair across from him. For a moment there was silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is waiting. Then he started talking. He didn't ask about my resume or experience. Instead, he said the job involved testing human behavior under stress. I wasn't sure if I'd heard him right. He said something about marketing being about understanding how people react to pressure. Then he started asking questions. Strange ones. He asked what I'd do if someone screamed nearby, whether I'd run toward the sound or away from it. Then he asked how far I'd go to protect someone I loved. He leaned forward slightly, watching me too closely. He asked if I'd kill a stranger to save my mother. I laughed a little, thinking he was joking, but his face didn't change. He didn't blink. His eyes had that strange kind of stillness, the kind that makes you realize how alive your own nervousness is. The more he stared, the more my hands started to sweat. I tried to answer his questions in a way that sounded rational, but it didn't seem to matter what I said. He looked like he was studying something else entirely. Not my answers, but how I said them. Then he stood up and walked to the window. The rain had started to come down harder outside. He put one hand on the glass and looked out over the city. I watched the back of his suit perfectly pressed, the thin line of his shoulders. He said almost casually that he once interviewed someone who jumped. I didn't say anything. I just sat there frozen, unsure whether he was trying to scare me or test me. The office was dead quiet. No hum of machines, no sound of anyone else on the floor. Just rain tapping against the glass and that man standing there, still as a statue. He turned back slowly and gave me that same long smile again. My stomach twisted. Something in that smile felt wrong, like he was pretending to be human, and not doing a good job of it. I mumbled something about another appointment and stood up. He didn't stop me, didn't say a word. As I reached the door, I glanced back through the glass. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the chair I'd been sitting in, smiling faintly, like something invisible was still there. I took the elevator down, every floor feeling slower than the last. When I stepped outside, the air felt different, heavy, metallic. I didn't even bother with the bus. I walked the whole way home in the rain, replaying the whole thing over and over in my head. I told myself he was just some eccentric guy. Maybe the office was being remodeled. Maybe it was some weird startup thing, like an interview experiment. But something about it stayed with me. The way he said jumped, the way the window looked behind him, the emptiness of that entire floor. I tried to look up the company later. I typed every version of MKT Portland marketing startup I could think of. Nothing came up. I searched the address, 415 Morrison Street. The building existed, but no tenants were listed on the 12th floor. The property management website said the space had been vacant for years. I tried to move on, found another job part-time at a print shop. But every now and then I'd think about that man's face, the strange calmness, the way the air in that room felt. Sometimes I'd wonder if anyone else had gone to that interview. About 3 months later, I saw something online. It was a small local article, buried deep in the Portland news section. Maintenance worker discovers blood in vacant office. It mentioned the 12th floor of an older downtown building on Morrison Street. That a janitor had found blood splattered across one wall and pooled near a window. No one could determine when it had happened. The room had no furniture, no nameplate, nothing but a single chair. Police were investigating but hadn't identified anyone. The property manager said no company was ever registered to that address. The article didn't have a photo, but I knew. The description was exact. The window, the floor number, the empty space. I stared at the screen for a long time, reading and rereading the lines. For a while, I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. Maybe someone else broke in. Maybe the janitor made a mistake. But late at night, I'd see that office in my head again. The white walls, the desk, that sticky note on the door, and I'd think about how he said he once interviewed someone who jumped. Sometimes I wonder if that person ever existed, or if he'd just been waiting for someone else to take their place. After that, I stopped applying to jobs that didn't list their company name. I stopped taking elevators alone. Even now, years later, when I see an empty office building with lights still on after dark, I can't help but imagine him sitting there, behind a desk staring at an empty chair, waiting for the next person desperate enough to walk through the door. I started babysitting for the Parkers when I was 16. Their house sat off Old Bainbridge Road, half hidden behind tall pines and a cracked driveway that always looked damp, even in dry weather. They had a son named Ryan, 7 years old, thin with blonde hair that always looked like it had been cut at home. His parents left every Friday at 7 sharp, no matter what. They'd hand me a crisp 50, tell me there was food in the fridge, and say they'd be back around midnight. It was the easiest job I'd ever had. Ryan wasn't a bad kid. Quiet, polite, never caused trouble. He didn't talk much but always wanted to play hide and seek, specifically in the dark. The first time he asked, I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he was serious. He'd turn off every light in the house, make me count to 30, and disappear somewhere. Usually I'd find him in the hall closet. Door shut, shoes on the floor, that faint smell of old coats and dust. He'd grin when I opened it. That was his favorite spot every time. The house itself was strange. It was old but well kept, with beige carpet that muffled every sound. There were framed photos on the walls, family portraits, vacations, birthday parties, but Ryan was never smiling in any of them. His parents looked stiff too, like they were posing for a passport photo. The air inside always felt heavy, like the windows hadn't been opened in years. One Friday in late September, the sun went down early, and by 7 the Parkers were already backing down the driveway. Ryan stood by the window watching them leave. I remember the sound of their car fading down Old Bainbridge until the woods swallowed it up. The house got quiet. I microwaved some leftover pasta, and Ryan sat at the table eating without saying much. Around 8 he asked if we could play hide and seek again. I turned off the lights one by one, until the whole house was dark except for the glow from the digital clock on the microwave. I started counting in the living room, pressing my face into my arms. 30 seconds later, I started walking through the house with my phone's flashlight. Usually I'd find him pretty quickly, but that night I heard something strange before I even got to the hallway. A sound like muffled giggling coming from the direction of the closet. High-pitched, quick, like a kid trying not to be caught. I smiled, thinking he'd made it easy for me this time. I opened the closet door, shining the light in and empty. Just the coats, the vacuum, and a box of Christmas decorations on the floor. But I swear the giggling had come from right there. The sound had been too clear, too close. I called out for him, a little uneasy now. Answer. Then I heard his footsteps, small, fast, running in from the kitchen. He stopped in the hall, staring at me, eyes wide. "That's not me," he whispered. At first I thought he was messing with me, but his face wasn't playful. He looked scared. I noticed his hands trembling. Then I smelled it. Something sour, wet like damp soil after a storm, mixed with something faintly metallic. The air felt heavier in that hallway, colder too. I shut the closet door and told him we should go sit in the living room, but he wouldn't move. I tried calling his parents, straight to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. I decided we were leaving at least until they got home. But when I tried the front door, it wouldn't open. It wasn't locked exactly. It just wouldn't budge like it had been sealed shut. I pulled harder, then tried the back door. Same thing. Ryan sat on the couch, knees pulled up to his chest. I could hear something faint from down the hallway. Soft shuffling, like fabric brushing against the walls. Every time I tried to focus on it, it would stop. The smell got stronger. I checked every vent and window, thinking maybe something had died in the crawl space. The house sat on an old foundation, so there was a low, narrow crawl space under most of it. I'd seen the hatch once in the laundry room, half covered by a rug. I thought maybe an animal had gotten trapped. I pulled the rug back and there it was. A square wooden door with a metal ring handle. The smell seemed to come from right there. I didn't want to open it, but curiosity pushed harder than fear. The handle was cold. When I lifted it, the wood creaked. The smell rushed out stronger than ever. That thick, wet rot that makes your throat tighten. My flashlight caught movement inside. Not a lot, just a faint shift, like something reacting to the light. I dropped the hatch and stumbled back. Ryan hadn't moved from the couch. He was staring at the hallway again, his eyes glassy. I asked him what was wrong, but he just shook his head slowly. I could tell he'd known something was wrong for a long time. For the next hour, I sat by the front door with him, checking the window every few minutes, waiting for headlights. The sound from the hallway came and went. Quiet scratching. Sometimes a muffled laugh that sounded almost human, but not quite right. At 11:57, headlights finally swept across the living room wall. I'd never felt more relieved. The Parkers' car pulled into the driveway. The engine cut off. The door slammed, and a moment later, the front door jerked open easily as if nothing had been wrong with it. Mr. Parker came in first. He looked furious, his jaw tight. He told me I was never coming back here. Just that, no reason. His tone made it clear not to argue. Mrs. Parker didn't look at me at all. She grabbed Ryan by the arm and pulled him down the hallway toward his room. I left without saying anything, my hands shaking the whole drive home. I told my mom I didn't want to babysit for them anymore. I didn't tell her why. A week later, I saw their names in the local paper. The headline said they'd been arrested for unlawful imprisonment and abuse. The story explained that police had found a man in their crawl space, mid-30s, severely brain damaged, malnourished, unable to speak. He'd been kept there for years. They didn't say much else about who he was or why, only that he'd been a relative. I sat at the kitchen table reading that article over and over, trying to understand how I'd been sitting just above him all those nights, while Ryan played hide and seek, while I heard laughter from the closet, while I smelled that damp, sour air. It made everything fit too perfectly. That night, I lay awake thinking about how Ryan had whispered, "That's not me." How sure he'd been. He must have heard that giggling for years, thinking it was part of the game. Maybe it started as a sound from the vents. Maybe it was real laughter from the man in the crawl space. Maybe he didn't even know what was down there, only that it was alive. The house still stands off Old Bainbridge Road. I've driven past it a few times since then. The windows are always dark, grass grown up high around the porch, the mailbox still leaning sideways. I don't think anyone ever moved back in. Sometimes when I drive by, I roll the window down just a little. There's a smell that hangs in the air there, faint but familiar, damp and sour like rain-soaked soil. And every time I think about that closet door, about how sure I'd been that sound had come from inside. The paper never said what happened to the man they found, or to Ryan after his parents were arrested. I looked for updates for a while, but the story disappeared fast, buried under newer news. Maybe he was taken in by relatives, maybe foster care. But what stays with me isn't the article or even that smell. It's that sound, that brief, high-pitched giggle echoing from an empty closet. I know it wasn't a ghost or anything supernatural. It was just a man who'd been hidden away for so long he'd started making sounds to feel less alone. And every time I think of that, I wonder how many games of hide-and-seek Ryan played before realizing someone else had already been hiding there all along. I was driving through northern Arizona after midnight, somewhere between Flagstaff and Winslow, where the road cuts through long stretches of empty desert and pine forest. It was early February, cold enough that my breath fogged the inside of the windshield every time I exhaled. The sky was clear and moonless, the stars sharp and scattered over the black horizon. The heater in my old Toyota was working overtime, humming against the silence of the highway. I'd been driving since evening, trying to make it to Albuquerque before sunrise. The road was empty except for the occasional semi, its headlights flashing by like ghosts of movement in the dark. I hadn't seen another car in over 20 minutes. Then I saw him, a man standing on the shoulder, arm out, thumb pointed toward the sky. He looked small against the stretch of nothing around him, a thin figure under a flickering orange streetlight near a service sign. Jeans, flannel shirt, a dark backpack slung over one shoulder. His hair was long and unkempt, and I remember thinking he must be freezing. I don't usually stop for hitchhikers, but it was so empty out there, and I felt bad leaving someone alone in the cold like that. My better judgment told me to keep driving, but I slowed down anyway and pulled onto the shoulder. The tires crunched over gravel as I stopped beside him. He stepped closer, cautious, his breath visible in the headlights. He didn't smile, Just opened the passenger door and got in without saying much. The smell of the night air followed him in. Cold, dusty, and sharp like sagebrush and old dirt. "Thanks," he said finally. His voice was calm, almost flat. I told him no problem, asked where he was headed. He said east, just east, that was it. No town name, no question in return. I waited for more, but he didn't offer anything else. Just stared out the window as we started rolling again. He said his name was Trent after a while. In that same calm tone, like he was stating something irrelevant. He didn't ask for my name and I didn't give it. I offered him some coffee from my thermos. He looked at it for a second, then shook his head. I shrugged and took a sip myself, trying to ignore how quiet it felt in the car. The hum of the tires and the heater were the only sounds. For the next few miles, he barely moved. He sat with his hands on his knees, eyes fixed straight ahead or sometimes to the side, watching the trees blur past. Every time the headlights hit a sign or a patch of snow on the ground, the light would reflect on his face for a second. His skin was pale, the kind that looks like it doesn't see much sunlight, and there was a strange stillness about him, like he wasn't tired. Wasn't alert, just there. We drove maybe 10 minutes in silence. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "You ever bury something that wasn't meant to be found?" It hit me strange. The words sounded like he'd been thinking about them for a long time before saying them. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. I said no, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he smiled, just a slow, small smile that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "You will." The way he said it wasn't like a threat. It was almost casual, but that made it worse. Like he knew something I didn't. The air inside the car felt different after that. I could hear my own breathing, hear the faint rattle of the glove box. The road stretched ahead in a long ribbon of black, and I started counting the distance markers, waiting for some kind of exit or gas station, anywhere with light. I wanted to pull over, to get him out, but I didn't want to make it obvious that I was scared. After a few more miles, he told me to stop near a dirt pull-off where the trees got thick again. There were no signs, no lights, just a small path leading into darkness. He said this was fine, that he'd walk from there. I stopped the car. My heartbeat felt like it was sitting in my throat. He opened the door slowly, stepped out, and adjusted his backpack. Then he turned back to look at me, just for a second, and said, "Drive safe." He walked toward the trees and disappeared. I sat there for a while. Engine running, headlights pointing into the empty stretch of dirt and shadow. My fingers were trembling a little on the steering wheel. I waited until I couldn't see even the outline of his figure anymore, then finally shifted back into drive and pulled onto the road. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't look back. For the next few hours, every time I saw the shadow of a tree move or a shape by the roadside, I thought I saw him again. I kept glancing into the rearview mirror even though I knew he couldn't be there. I stopped at a gas station near Holbrook just to stand under the fluorescent lights and breathe for a minute. The clerk asked if I was okay. I said I was fine, just tired. But I wasn't tired. I was wired and cold all over. 2 days later, I heard about it on the radio. A short segment in the morning local news. They said police had closed off a section of highway outside Flagstaff. Same stretch I'd driven that night. A shallow grave had been found about 30 feet off the road near a dirt pull-off. The report didn't say who or what they found, just that the investigation was ongoing, and they were asking anyone who had been in the area recently to contact the sheriff's office. I turned up the volume, waiting for more details, but that was all. The announcer moved on to weather reports like it was nothing. I knew exactly where that spot was. I could picture it. The narrow shoulder, the turn of the trees, the dirt road that disappeared into blackness. That's where he'd gotten out. For a long time, I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence. The highway runs for miles through empty land, and people go missing in the desert all the time. Maybe someone else had been there before him. Maybe it had nothing to do with him at all. But every time I replayed that night in my head, every time I remembered the way he'd smiled when he said those words, it felt impossible to believe that. "You will." I couldn't get it out of my head. The way his voice sounded, calm, certain, like he was describing something inevitable. After that, I stopped driving at night altogether. Even on short trips, I'd make sure I was home before dark. I started checking my back seat every time I got in the car, double-checking that the doors were locked. I told a couple of friends about it once, but they just laughed and said, "That's what happens when you pick up strangers in the middle of nowhere." I never told them about what he said. A few months later, I read an article online about an unidentified body found near that same stretch of highway. The police still hadn't released details. No suspect, no official cause of death, nothing. Just a note about how difficult it was to track anything out there in the desert. The soil, the animals, the wind that erases footprints. It was all just quiet space swallowing whatever's left behind. Every time I drive through Arizona now, I think about that night. The cold, the stars, the sound of gravel under the tires. I think about him walking into those trees without looking back. Like he already knew exactly where he was going. And sometimes, when the highway gets too quiet and the dark starts pressing in, I wonder if he was telling me what was going to happen to me, or what he'd already done. Either way, I never stop for anyone anymore. I lived in a small apartment building near Fenway, a narrow red brick place with 8 units stacked like shoeboxes. I had the second-floor corner apartment, small but bright. The kind of place where you could hear your neighbors sneeze through the vents. My downstairs neighbor, Mr. Hanlon, was an older man in his late 60s, maybe early 70s. He was always dressed neatly. Buttoned shirts, slacks, polished shoes. Even on Sundays when most people wandered down to grab their mail in sweatpants, he'd appear with his collar pressed and sleeves buttoned at the wrist. He never said much, just nodded if we passed each other in the hallway. I used to think he was harmless, even friendly in a quiet sort of way. Then the smell started. It was faint at first, something I couldn't quite place. Sweet but wrong, metallic like overripe fruit left in a warm room. Drifted up through the vents at night, especially when the radiators kicked on. At first I thought maybe something had gone bad in the shared basement. Old pipes, garbage, something dead in the walls. I tried to ignore it, but it got stronger every day. One night it woke me up. I remember the time exactly, 3:07 a.m. I was lying in bed when I heard a sound coming from directly below me. A low dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Slow, uneven. It went on for almost a full minute, stopped, then started again. I sat up, listening. The building was silent otherwise, no traffic outside, no wind, just that dragging. Then came the knock. 3 soft knocks on my door, not loud, but close enough to make my stomach drop. I hesitated before opening it. When I did, Mr. Hanlon was standing there in the hallway, smiling in that calm, polite way of his. He was holding a black trash bag in one hand, tied at the top. His other sleeve was damp, darkened from something that had soaked through the cuff. He asked if I had any bleach, said he'd run out cleaning a spill. His tone was casual, steady. I remember my eyes going from his sleeve to the trash bag, which looked too heavy for simple garbage. I didn't want to think about what could be inside it. I nodded, went to the kitchen and handed him half a bottle of bleach I kept under the sink. He thanked me and left. The sound of his footsteps going down the stairs echoed faintly, and then the door to his apartment shut. I stood there for a while after that, just staring at my door. My hands felt cold. There was something off about his calmness, the way he smiled like everything was fine. I went back to bed but didn't sleep. Around dawn, I decided to call maintenance. Told them about the smell, the noise, that something felt wrong. The guy on the phone said he'd check it out. By late morning, 2 maintenance workers were in the hallway, knocking on Mr. Hanlon's door. No answer. They used the master key and went inside. I watched from the top of the stairs as one of them stepped back into the hallway and said something I couldn't hear. He looked pale. A minute later, he told me to go back upstairs and wait for the police. They arrived fast. 2 cruisers, then another. I watched through my peephole as officers went in and out. They carried out 3 large evidence bags, heavy-looking, wrapped tight in plastic. Someone said body parts, low enough that they probably thought no one else could hear. One of the officers later knocked on my door and asked if I'd seen or heard anything unusual the past few days. I said no. My voice shook a little when I said it, but they didn't seem to notice. After they left, the building felt dead quiet. The hallway smelled faintly of disinfectant. They taped off his door with yellow police tape and posted a "Do Not Enter" notice. I sat in my living room staring at that bleach bottle on my counter, the one I'd given him. He hadn't returned it. I picked it up. The handle was sticky, faintly greasy. His fingerprints were still on it, dark smudges pressed into the plastic. That night I couldn't stop thinking about the noise I'd heard, the dragging, the smell. I tried to piece it together in my head. The police said the woman was someone he'd met online. She'd been missing for days. They didn't say much more than that, but the story made the local news later. They showed a photo of Mr. Hanlon in an old driver's license picture. Neatly dressed, smiling faintly, exactly how I'd always seen him. The reporter said police believed he'd killed before, that there were indications of other possible victims. I didn't sleep for a while after that. Every time the building creaked or the radiator hissed, I'd jolt awake. The worst part wasn't what I'd heard that night. It was knowing how close I'd been. He'd stood right at my door, holding that trash bag, his sleeve wet from something I didn't want to name. He could have stepped inside, could have decided I was easier to deal with than whatever mess he was hiding downstairs. I found myself staring at the bleach bottle again days later, still sitting on my counter. The police never asked for it, and I never offered. I thought about throwing it out, but I couldn't. It felt wrong to touch it, like holding a piece of what he'd done. Eventually, I slid it into a plastic grocery bag and shoved it under my sink, behind cleaning supplies I rarely used. For weeks after, the apartment still carried that faint sweetness, even after the air cleared. I'd catch it sometimes at night, just for a second. It made me nauseous. I started avoiding the stairwell that led past his door, even though his apartment was sealed. I imagined what it must look like inside. Dark stains under the carpet, bleach poured unevenly on the floor, maybe streaks on the walls where he'd wiped. Neighbors began moving out. The woman across the hall left first, then the couple upstairs. The landlord eventually replaced the locks on his apartment, cleaned it out, and rented it again to someone new. A young guy, probably a student. I didn't tell him anything when we passed in the hallway. He wouldn't have believed it anyway. Months later, I read that the police had connected Mr. Hanlon to 2 other disappearances. Women who'd met men through the same dating site. Same age range, same general area. They found his old computer in storage. Messages, photos, names. He'd been careful, but not careful enough. What got me was how ordinary he had seemed. How he could stand in a hallway at 3 in the morning, smile politely, and ask for bleach like it was the most natural thing in the world. How he'd gone to the trouble of dressing neatly, keeping up small routines, like he was living 2 separate lives stacked on top of each other. Every time I passed his old door after that, I'd think about the way sound travels through those thin floors. I'd remember that dragging noise. I tried to tell myself maybe I could have stopped it, called sooner, done something different. But when I replayed that moment, him smiling, the damp sleeve, the bag, I knew there wasn't anything I would have done differently. I'd have still handed him the bleach. The smell finally disappeared after winter, when the building turned off the heat and the air changed. But the silence stayed, the kind that feels thick, like the walls remember what happened. I still live there, though sometimes I think I shouldn't. There's a stain on the ceiling above where his living room used to be, faint but visible if the light hits it right. I never told anyone about the bleach bottle. It's still under my sink, sealed in that grocery bag. Every few months I think about taking it out, maybe giving it to the police, but I can't bring myself to touch it. It's not evidence anymore, not officially. It's just plastic and residue. But every time I see it, I remember his knock, his calm voice, the smell, the dragging. And I remember that smile, the one that told me everything was fine when it absolutely wasn't. I hiked solo that summer, through Glacier National Park, starting from the Chief Mountain trailhead. I'd been hiking for years, but that trip was supposed to be my first long solo trek. No friends, no distractions, just me, the trail, and silence. The kind of silence that gets into your head after a few days, when you stop hearing the noise of the world and start hearing yourself breathe. By the time I reached the Belly River Trail, I'd already been on the move for almost a week. My legs were sore, but I felt stronger every day. The weather was perfect. Thin air, the faint smell of pine and wet soil, and no one around for miles. I crossed creeks using fallen logs, filled my bottles with cold water straight from streams, and stopped only when I had to. That evening I was looking for a place to camp before dark. I knew there was a site near the junction, not an official campground, but one of those small clearings used often enough to be recognizable. Around 6 p.m. I saw it, a flat spot near the water framed by tall fir trees. What caught my eye first was the flash of orange. A tent. It was small, maybe for one person, set up close to the tree line. The front flap hung open. A sleeping bag was half out, and there was gear scattered around, a stove, a boot, a cooking pot, even a map weighed down by a rock, but no person. I called out a quick hello, expecting someone to pop out of the trees, but nothing. Just the wind moving through the branches and the low sound of water nearby. I figured maybe the camper had gone to filter water or take a short walk. I set my pack down and decided to wait before setting up my own tent. An hour passed. Then two. The sun sank behind the ridge, painting everything gold, then gray. Still no sign of anyone. The gear looked like it had been left in a hurry. A knife stuck in a log. A half-full water bottle tipped on its side. I walked a short loop around the clearing, maybe 50 yards out, but found nothing. No footprints heading away, no trail leading off. I sat by the fire pit someone had built before, just ashes and a few charred pieces of wood left. I ate some jerky and tried to ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. The air had gone still, heavy, like before a storm. I kept glancing at the orange tent. By the time dusk hit, I was still the only person there. I debated hiking on, but darkness was closing in fast. I decided I'd set my tent up on the opposite side of the clearing. Keep my distance and leave first thing in the morning. Around 9, when everything had gone almost black, I started to hear crunching in the woods. Not branches falling, not the random noises you get used to in the backcountry. Steady steps, deliberate, circling the clearing. Froze. The sound moved left, then right, then behind the orange tent. I called out once, just a short, "Hello?" My voice sounded too loud. The noise stopped for a moment, then started again, closer. That's when I saw him. He stepped into view between two trees. A man, barefoot, wearing only shorts and a headlamp. His face was streaked with mud, smeared unevenly like camouflage. He just stood there breathing hard, staring straight at me. His chest was thin, ribs visible even in the half-light. He didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then he said, calm, low, "You shouldn't camp here." The way he said it made my stomach tighten. Not like a warning, more like he was stating a fact he expected me to understand. I asked where his tent was. He looked at the orange one, then back at me and smiled. "You're in it." Something in my body told me to leave right then. I didn't even respond. I grabbed my pack, threw it over my shoulder, left my cooking gear and started down the trail with my flashlight shaking in my hand. I didn't look back. I could hear him moving, not chasing but walking, slow, following just far enough that I could hear the sound of his feet brushing the ground. That faint dry scrape kept me going faster, almost jogging. Every few minutes I'd glance behind, seeing only dark trees and the edge of my own beam of light. I hiked all night. My legs burned. My throat went dry. At some point I thought I saw another light through the trees. A quick flash like his headlamp catching a reflection. But it was gone before I could be sure. I didn't stop. By dawn I reached the ranger station near Goat Haunt, pale, shaking, covered in dirt. The ranger on duty must have thought I'd been lost for days. I told him what happened. The tent, the man, the mud on his face, the words he said. I gave the exact location. Even mentioned the map and the scattered gear. He looked confused, then checked the registry. He said there were no other campers signed in for that section. No solo permits, no groups. I was the only one supposed to be there. They sent a team out later that morning to check. I waited for hours, sitting on the bench outside the small cabin, drinking water and trying to stop shaking. When the rangers came back, they said they didn't find anyone. No orange tent, no gear, nothing. It looked like no one had been there at all. For a week after, I tried to forget about it. I stayed in a motel near St. Mary, kept my head down, tried to convince myself I'd just stumbled into some weird misunderstanding. Maybe a hunter, maybe a squatter. I wanted to believe that. Then, a week later, the same ranger called me. His tone was different this time, slower, more careful. They'd found remains downriver, caught in some brush along the bank, bones mostly, stripped clean. They thought it was an animal attack at first, maybe a bear. But there were knife marks, deep, clean cuts on the long bones. No clothes, no gear, no backpack. Just bones. When I asked about the tent, he said they never found it, not a single piece. The site where I'd seen it looked untouched, like no one had ever camped there. I left Montana the next day. I couldn't shake the image of that man standing there silent, mud drying on his skin, looking at me like I'd stolen something that belonged to him. For weeks after, I kept seeing orange whenever I closed my eyes. The color of that tent, that bright flash against the green of the trees. Even now, years later, I still hike sometimes, but never alone, never without checking every site before I set up. And when I hear footsteps in the trees at night, I don't wait to see who it is. I move. I keep going until there's light, because out there in all that open wilderness, you realize how easy it is for someone to disappear, how a tent, a name, a body can vanish without a trace. And sometimes the person who takes them doesn't just live in the woods. Sometimes they wait for you to step into their place to make it yours, just long enough for them to take it back. I moved into that building in late 2018, an old brick place just off Elm Street in Cambridge. 3 floors, 12 units, thin walls, and always that faint smell of old carpet and radiator dust. My apartment was on the 2nd floor, directly beneath a guy named Thomas. He introduced himself once, maybe the first week I moved in. Mid-30s, tall, quiet voice, pale. He told me he was an audio engineer, worked freelance, needed perfect silence to do his job. Said it like it was a warning. I didn't think much of it. The place was cheap and I liked the neighborhood. Most tenants were students or people working odd hours. The kind of building where everyone minded their own business. But from the very beginning, there was one thing that stood out about Thomas. The noise from his fans. He had these huge fans running day and night. You could hear them faintly through the ceiling. That steady, low hum that never stopped. Sometimes it was almost comforting, like white noise. Other times it got under my skin. It was so constant that I began to notice when it changed. If he turned one off, I'd feel it before I heard it. That shift in the background, like something in the air had gone missing. I used to imagine what his place looked like. I pictured it as a soundproof studio with foam panels and cables everywhere. Maybe a few monitors, a keyboard, some fancy equipment. He kept to himself completely. No visitors, no deliveries, no noise other than those fans. Then one night, around 2 in the morning, the fans stopped. It woke me up, not because of a sound, but because of the silence. It was so abrupt it felt wrong, like the power had gone out. But the hallway light under my door was still on. I sat there in bed, listening. The silence was sharp, hollow. I could hear the pipes ticking, the refrigerator humming. Then came this faint tapping. It was so light I almost thought it was my window, but it wasn't. It was coming from above, from his apartment. A slow, uneven tapping, like someone drumming their fingers against glass or metal. It would go quiet for a few seconds, then start again. I lay there, listening, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he was fixing something, or maybe it was some piece of equipment. After a few minutes, it stopped completely. I tried to go back to sleep but couldn't. The silence was too heavy now, and my brain kept waiting for the fans to come back on. They never did. The next morning, the building manager was outside my door, talking to someone in the hallway. I overheard him mention that Thomas had moved out. Left a note, he said. Something about not being able to stand the noise anymore. That made me laugh to myself. The guy who ran fans 24 hours a day complaining about noise. It didn't make sense. The people are strange, I thought. Maybe he snapped. Maybe he found a quieter place. A couple of guys came the next day to clean out his unit. They carried down a few boxes, a mattress, some old computer equipment. I peeked up the stairwell as they worked. The door to his apartment was propped open, and I could see that the walls were lined with dark foam panels. Real soundproofing. There were black trash bags piled in the corner. I remember thinking it smelled weird up there, like chemicals or rubber. After he left, the building seemed quieter. No more humming from above, no more fans. At first it felt nice, like the place finally settled. But at night I started hearing other small noises. Not loud, just strange. Little creaks and cracks in the ceiling that hadn't been there before. Sometimes I thought I heard faint knocks in the walls, and I'd tell myself it was just pipes or air in the vents. But every now and then, that same light tapping sound would return. Not often, just enough to unsettle me. It was about 3 weeks later when I saw the missing person flyer. It was taped to the front door of our building. A woman named Laura, late 20s, brown hair, last seen near Elm Street. The photo looked familiar somehow, though I couldn't place her. Maybe I'd seen her in the neighborhood, or maybe passing in the hall. The date on the flyer made my stomach twist. She'd gone missing around the same time Thomas left. Then the police came, 2 detectives and a few uniformed officers. They knocked on every door, asked questions, took notes. When they got to me, I told them what I knew, that he was quiet, always had fans running. Then one night they stopped. One of the detectives looked at me for a long second when I said that, like it meant something. They went upstairs for hours. I heard heavy footsteps, doors opening and closing, muffled voices. At one point, they carried out a few large rolls of plastic and what looked like metal brackets. The hallway smelled strongly of bleach afterward. Later, the manager told me what they'd found, though he didn't want to. He said the apartment had been almost completely sealed off. The windows covered, walls layered with insulation and foam. There was a thick sheet of plastic on the floor, and a single metal chair bolted down in the middle of the room. He said it looked like some kind of setup for recording, but the police thought otherwise. They found stains under the plastic, marks on the chair. The kind of marks you don't get from just sitting. That's when it hit me. Those fans weren't for comfort. They were there to hide things, to drown out noise that shouldn't be heard. I thought back to that night. The silence, the tapping. I realized it wasn't random. The fan stopped because whatever he'd been doing up there was done. The tapping came after, maybe from the person who couldn't make a sound anymore. For days I couldn't sleep. Every small sound made me tense. I kept picturing him up there, pacing in that padded room, maybe listening through the floor, knowing that nobody below could hear anything over the hum of those fans. I thought about how many times I'd been sitting in my living room watching TV, while something unthinkable was happening just a few feet above my head. The police never released details. They said evidence was found, but no body. Rumors spread in the building. Some tenants moved out. The place got quieter, emptier. A few weeks after the investigation ended, I came home late from work and found my new upstairs neighbor moving in. A young couple this time. They were unpacking boxes, cheerful, oblivious. They had no idea what had happened in that apartment. The door was wide open, and as I walked past, I glanced inside. The soundproof panels were gone, but faint outlines remained on the walls like ghosts of the foam. There were small round marks in the floorboards where the bolts used to be. They'd painted over the stains. You could still see them faintly in the light. That night, when I lay down, the fans came back in my head. I could almost hear them again, that low mechanical hum that once covered everything. For the first time, I realized how comforting it had actually been. Not because of what it was, but because of what it hid. Sometimes, late at night, when the building is still and the walls creak, I think about all the nights I turned the TV up just a little louder, trying to ignore faint sounds from above. I wonder how many times someone had tapped, hoping someone would hear. And I think about the note he left. Can't stand the noise anymore. I don't think he meant the noise outside. I think he meant the noise inside his head, the sound he'd created, the one that even the fans couldn't drown out. He lived right above me for almost 2 years. Every night those fans hummed while I slept, believing it was just the sound of work. And now, sometimes when the city goes quiet around 2 a.m., I wake up to silence, and I swear in the stillness, I can hear that same faint tapping again. Not from above anymore, but from somewhere deep in the walls, like the building itself remembers. And every time I turn the TV back on, just like I used to. Because silence isn't peaceful to me anymore. It's a sound I'll never be able to trust again.